Hey guys, as we wind down tonight, we find ourselves facing a quiet dilemma no one ever wants to think about until it's too late. You're standing in the woods, or on a castle wall, or behind a wagon with suspiciously low sides. Nature has called loudly, rudely, and with absolutely no sense of timing. But this is history. There is no roll of two-ply, no scented wipes, no emergency napkin in your pocket. There is only the world, and whatever part of it feels least like sandpaper. Tonight, we explore the forgotten and frequently regrettable history of toilet hygiene. From smooth stones to communal sponges, moss to monarch-grade silk, we're diving into the human pursuit of not walking away itchy, or worse. You'll sit on icy wooden boards with holes barely wide enough. You'll discover that privacy is a modern fantasy. And yes, you'll meet the dreaded groom of the stool, whose job is somehow both glamorous and humiliating. You might not survive this one, at least not with your dignity intact. So, before you settle in, feel free to give the video a like and hit subscribe if you're truly enjoying the journey. You can also leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always a small wonder to see people tuning in from so many corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum in the background, and together, let's ease into tonight's story. You didn't ask to need the privy this morning, but your stomach had other plans. It always has other plans, mostly ones that involve regret, urgency, and questionable stew from last night's communal pot. The sun isn't even up yet. The castle stones are still sweating with chill, and the wind outside is howling like it's practicing for a haunting. Still, here you are clomping your way up a narrow spiral staircase, wrapped in 3 layers of scratchy wool, each more whole than garment, with your dignity trailing behind you like a defeated dog. You're on your way to the garderobe, a fancy word for what is essentially a vertical hole in a wall, built over an even less fancy drop zone. Maybe you were expecting something more private. A bench, perhaps. A door. A moment to reflect on your life choices in peace. No, this is not the place for reflection. This is the place where you cling to a freezing stone wall with one hand, your tunic with the other, and pray the wind doesn't decide to get involved. Spoiler, the wind always gets involved. The garderobe is perched high in one of the castle turrets, which sounds romantic, until you realize it's also exposed to every gust, squall, and passing bird with no respect for personal space. You sit down hesitantly on a slab of cold stone with a hole in it. That's the whole setup. That's it. No cushion, no handle, not even a polite curtain to hide your shame from the seagulls. The stone is colder than betrayal. It sears your thighs with the enthusiasm of a vengeful spirit. You try to be quick, but haste leads to splashes. You try to be careful, but hesitation leads to longer exposure. There is no winning here. There is only the breeze, and your slow realization that medieval architecture was designed by people who clearly outsourced their own toilet use to someone else. You look down the hole. You shouldn't, but you do. It drops straight into the castle moat, or maybe a cesspit below, a swirling soup of unspeakable substances, secrets, and the occasional rat that has made peace with its job. Smell. Yes, there is a smell. It's ancient, ancestral even. It's the smell of everyone who came before you, layered like the worst kind of lasagna. You breathe through your mouth, which turns out to be a mistake. The taste of the air is worse than the smell. It clings to your tongue like a curse. Maybe you think there's something to wipe with. There isn't. Not unless you count the stiff handful of straw hanging nearby, decorated with suspicious flecks and a faint glimmer of hope. Or a crusty scrap of linen tied to a nail, communal, of course. Maybe you'll just pull your tunic down and pretend nothing happened. Maybe that's what everyone else is doing too. There is no soap. There's no basin. There's no dignity. There is wind. There is exposure. And there is a stone that now knows too much about you. You finish, shuffle awkwardly back down the stairs, and try to pretend your rear isn't numb. But it is. It absolutely is. This is the fortress, built for strength, not comfort. You've made it back down the stone steps, legs slightly wobbly, backside frozen into a shape it should not be. Maybe now, finally, You can forget the whole thing, push it from memory, pretend you just went to admire the view from the tower, not, in fact, participate in a medieval ritual of suffering disguised as a bathroom break. But no, you can't forget, because it follows you. Not just the memory, but the smell. And worse, the lingering itch of uncertainty. See, it wasn't just the wind and the cold that made the fortress Privy such a chamber of horrors. It was what came next, the cleaning part. Or rather, the enthusiastic pretending to clean part. And here's where you meet your enemy, the straw. Straw, in theory, is nature's sponge. It's dry, it's absorbantish, it's always lying around, but it's also sharp, splintery, and filled with the kind of particles that defy polite description. The straw near the garderobe is kept in a wooden bucket, replenished only when someone remembers, which, judging by its state, last happened sometime during the reign of a long-dead duke. It's grey, it's slightly damp, and it smells like it's been interviewing sewage for a memoir. You grab a handful. You have to. Maybe you hope for a soft piece, something fluffy, forgiving, cloud-like. Instead, you get a stiff bristle that pokes like a hedgehog and leaves you wondering if it was straw or just wheat in a bad mood. You attempt a half-hearted wipe and feel immediate regret. There's no angle that helps, no position that reduces the sense of betrayal. Maybe you get clever. Maybe you think, I'll use my own cloth. Bad idea. Cloths mean laundry, and laundry means boiling water, which you don't have. Cloths also mean carrying something soaked in your own shame across a public courtyard. It's hard to look dignified with a bundle of disaster tucked under your arm. Still, there's one more option, the communal rag. It's tied to a nail near the door, a linen square so stiff with age, and reused that it could stand on its own in court and testify against you. You stare at it. It stares back, somehow. Someone else used it before you. Someone will use it after. It is a never-ending loop of microbial roulette. If germs had a favourite party trick, this rag would be it. You try not to think about it, but you do. You always do. Your ancestors survived plagues, wars, famines, and yet this is how they chose to live, with a shared rag. And you, poor you, are now part of that lineage. And there's no hand-washing station. That's not a thing yet. The idea of hygiene exists in theory, like dragons or justice. You might rinse your hands with a bit of water from a barrel, but it's brownish and suspiciously chunky. Soap, if it exists, is hoarded, scented with lard and ashes, and kept under lock and key by the kitchen staff, not wasted on bodily functions. So you wipe. Or don't. You pretend. You adjust your tunic. You exit with the grace of someone hoping no one notices their existential crisis walking beside them. You pass a guard. He nods. You nod back. You both pretend this interaction isn't soaked in shared knowledge of what just occurred. This is medieval sanitation, a place where cleaning is a group activity and privacy is just a whisper the wind forgot to carry away. It starts with a rumble, not the romantic kind like thunder rolling over distant hills, but the kind that signals internal rebellion. Your gut has opinions, and it's expressing them in protest. Loudly, you turn over in your straw mattress, which is mostly lumps and regret, and try to ignore it. Maybe it'll pass. Maybe it's just the beans talking, or the salted fish, or that meat pie that may or may not have contained meat. No, it's not passing. You sigh, swing your legs over the side, and immediately remember that the floor is made of stone colder than betrayal and slightly wetter than expected. The fire in the hearth has died down to a sulking glow. The wind presses against the shutter like a gossip wanting in. The rest of the sleeping hall is silent, except for Cousin Gerald's snoring, which sounds like someone dragging a barrel of frogs across gravel. You don't want to go out there. No one ever wants to go out there, but your options are limited, and none of them involve dignity. You fumble for your cloak, find your shoes still damp and grab the torch from the wall. It's not there. Of course it's not. Someone took it earlier and didn't return it. Maybe they needed it for the same reason. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they got eaten by regret or wolves or both. You step out into the corridor anyway, using your hand as a guide against the damp stone wall. The air smells of mildew and secrets. Your breath fogs in front of you, curling like a ghost trying to escape your mouth. Somewhere above, a rat scampers across a beam, dropping something that you hope isn't symbolic. You find the stairs. They go up. They always go up. For some reason, the garderobe is always placed in the highest, most inconvenient part of the tower, possibly as a challenge, possibly as revenge. Each step is uneven. Some tilt. One is missing entirely. You remember that just in time. You reach the top. There it is, the tiny, crooked wooden door that leads to the night's least comforting destination. You push it open. It creaks like it's offended. The wind howls through the gap like a cold scream. You duck inside, just enough to be out of the worst of it, but not enough to be warm. You sit. You regret. You question every decision that brought you to this moment, starting with dinner and ending with being born in a time when indoor plumbing is a myth whispered by madmen. The stars are out tonight. You can see them through the narrow slit in the wall. They look beautiful, distant, entirely unsympathetic. The wind lifts the edge of your cloak, just to remind you who's in charge. You finish your business quickly, or as quickly as one can when one's nether regions are contemplating frostbite. You fumble with the straw again. It has not improved. You stand. Your legs have gone numb. Your pride has gone missing. Your torch is still missing, too. Back down the stairs. One by one. Each step a slippery negotiation between haste and survival. You return to your bed. It's still cold. Gerald is still snoring. The fire is still dead. But now, at least, you can lie awake in peace, thinking about the stars, the wind, and how tomorrow night will probably be worse, because it always is. You're not supposed to look down. Everyone says that, not just because of the height, but because of what's waiting beneath you, the moat, or what's pretending to be a moat. Once, long ago, someone imagined it as a majestic water barrier, full of elegant swans and tactical purpose. Now it's just a slow-moving soup of filth, old rainwater, and floating mysteries. And yes, your waste ends up there. Everyone does. You know this in theory, but today, unfortunately, the wind lifted your cloak just enough, and curiosity nudged your head forward. You looked. You shouldn't have. Down below, the murky surface ripples with things that have no business moving. The color is hard to describe, not quite brown, not quite green, more like the idea of decay got bored and started painting. Floating near the edge is something that might be a shoe, or a cabbage, or a shoe that was once a cabbage, or vice versa. You try to back away from the hole in the floor, but it's too late. The smell has arrived. It moves slower than sound, but faster than regret. It curls up into the garderobe with the confidence of someone who knows it will not be challenged. You cover your nose with your sleeve. This only adds wool, mildew, and disappointment to the mix. Still, you sit. Because you have to. Because even looking at the moat doesn't make the need disappear. Because biology doesn't care about architectural choices or your sense of shame. A fly buzzes past. It is large. It looks healthy. Alarmingly healthy, as though the moat has been feeding it ideas. It lingers by your ear, then disappears into the hole, presumably to report back. You tell yourself not to think about how many other people have used this exact spot. You tell yourself not to imagine how much of the floor below is now saturated with centuries of waste, slowly composting into history. You tell yourself a lot of things. None of them help. You reach for the straw again. Of course, it's the same straw. It's always the same straw. Somehow, it regenerates not with freshness, but with attitude. Today it feels sharper than usual, or maybe you're just more sensitive after 3 visits in one day. You shift your weight, trying not to tip toward the hole. There's no rail, no guard, no polite little fence. One wrong move and you're part of the Moors collection. There are rumours, whispered around the hearth, of a knight who slipped while adjusting his belt and was never seen again. You hope those are just stories. But when you peer into the darkness, you start to believe. You finish quickly, mostly out of fear. As you stand and adjust your clothing, you knock a pebble loose. It falls, bounces once, and then vanishes into the depths below. You listen. There is no splash, just silence. And somehow that's worse. You return to your duties, or at least pretend to, now carrying with you the knowledge of what lies beneath the castle walls. It haunts you in a quiet, slushing way. You will not eat cabbage tonight. You will not look at puddles the same way again. And next time you promise yourself you won't look down. But you will. You always do. Privacy in the fortress is a luxury reserved for ghosts and noble women. And even they don't always get it. You, a mere resident of the lower ranks, possibly a servant, possibly just unlucky, do not get solitude. You get walls that echo, floors that creak, and a garderobe situated with such strategic brilliance that the entire east corridor can enjoy every moment of your internal monologue rendered into splashy sound. It's not the kind of performance you were hoping to give today, but here you are again, clutching your cloak, trying to hover slightly above the stone seat like that might somehow make the situation more elegant. It doesn't. As you settle in, you hear footsteps. Someone's approaching. They pause. They wait. Now, you're no longer alone in your misery. You have an audience. A silent, uninvited, and deeply judgmental presence just outside the wooden door. The door, by the way, doesn't latch. It leans. And it squeaks if you breathe near it. You try to hold still. Maybe they'll go away. They don't. Now begins the etiquette dance of fortress toileting. Do you speak? No. That's worse. Do you make noise? You already did. Do you hold it? Do you pretend this is just an unusually shaped prayer room and hope they buy it? No one's that gullible. Eventually your body resumes its campaign of urgency, and you surrender to the process with a sigh that is part resignation, part apology to the universe. And then it happens, the splash. Not a gentle drop, not a dignified plop, but a full, resonant, echoing splash that bounces down the stone corridor like a herald's trumpet announcing your shame. The person outside coughs. Softly, politely, devastatingly. You consider staying here forever. Maybe this tower can be your new home. You've got cold walls, a bucket of straw, and a view. What more could you need? But eventually you must face the world again. You shuffle. You wipe. You whisper a small curse toward the architect who decided right angles and acoustics were necessary in a toilet tower. When you exit, the person waiting doesn't meet your eye. You don't meet theirs. There's a mutual agreement, unspoken but binding, that this moment will never be discussed. You nod. They nod. It's all very civil, very medieval, very horrifying. You pass by a chambermaid, who gives you a look not cruel, just weary. She knows. She's been there. She probably scrubbed that floor last week with vinegar and prayer. She gestures toward your hem. You glance down. A stain, small but present. You try not to think about what it is. You fail. You return to your duties, sweeping, perhaps, or peeling vegetables. The other servants pretend not to notice your flushed cheeks. You pretend your hands don't faintly smell of guilt. It's a dance everyone knows. The dance of shared suffering. Later, someone mentions the sound from the East Tower. A joke. Not at your expense, they say. But you know. You always know. There's no soap. There's no forgiveness. There's just stone, echoes, and the eternal fear of being remembered for the wrong splash. You thought summer was bad. The heat, the stench, the relentless swarm of flies orbiting your every movement like mournful spirits in search of a cause. But now it's winter, and suddenly you miss the flies. You miss the smell. You miss sweating through your tunic and cursing the sun. Because in winter, the castle changes. The walls grow teeth. The wind becomes personal. And the privy becomes a test of character. You wake before dawn, already shivering under your thin wool blanket. Not because you were summoned, not because the bells rang, but because your insides are staging a coup. Again, you consider ignoring it. Just turn over, pull the blanket tighter, think warm thoughts. You try, but your belly has other ideas. Ideas with urgency. The walk to the garderobe feels longer in winter. Every stone underfoot is ice-tipped and indifferent. Your breath fogs the air in front of you, curling upward like a small white flag of surrender. You pull your cloak tighter, not that it helps. It was once lined with fur, now it's mostly holes held together by the memory of warmth. Your nose runs. Your knees click. And as you climb the spiral stairs, you begin to bargain with the cold. Just let me survive this without crying, or freezing, or both. You open the door to the tower latrine. The wind greets you like an old enemy familiar, cruel and inescapable. It howls in, circles your legs, and settles in places wind should never settle. The stone seat is waiting, covered in frost. The hole beneath it exhales a draft that feels like it's trying to steal your soul through your lower spine. You hesitate. You consider squatting beside the garderobe instead. You even contemplate using a bucket and apologizing later. But no, that's how you end up in the stocks. Or worse, being pointed at during mealtime. So, with all the grace of a shivering barn cat, you perch above the icy void and pray your skin doesn't bond to the stone like a tongue to the cursed flagpole. You try to be quick. You can't be. The cold has turned your muscles into reluctant soup. You hear something crack. It's unclear whether it came from the seat or your will to live. And then, as if summoned by your suffering, the wind returns. Sharper this time. It rushes up through the hole with such force that you feel it in your teeth. You exhale sharply, then whimper just once, just quietly. But the echo makes sure everyone within 3 floors hears your shame. You reach for the straw. It's frozen. Not just cold frozen. Like someone dipped it in a bucket of regret and left it to harden overnight. You grab it anyway. You have no choice. It breaks in your hand. Splinters fly. One lands somewhere unmentionable. You don't even flinch. You've moved past pain. This is a realm beyond discomfort. This is medieval enlightenment. By the time you stand, your thighs are crimson, your fingers numb, and your spirit hollow. You hobble down the stairs like a chicken that's lost a bet. Your cloak flaps in the wind behind you like a defeated flag. Back in your quarters, you don't speak. Someone offers you porridge. You shake your head. You've already been through too much. Later that day, someone mentions spring. How lovely it will be. How fresh. You look at them. You say nothing, because you remember, spring means flies. Summer means smell. There is no good season. Only different flavors of suffering. The Lord is hosting guests this week. Important ones, apparently. You can tell by the way the servants are scrubbing the flagstones with vinegar and panic. And the steward has adopted a permanent expression of forced cheerfulness mixed with dread. And you, of course, were not consulted, but you are affected. Everyone is. When guests arrive, everything changes. Meals become more formal, silence becomes more dangerous, and the garderobe becomes busier. You thought you might get lucky today. That may be. With all the visitors distracted by roast boar and political intrigue, you could sneak up to the tower latrine without a cue. You were wrong. So wrong. The line snakes along the upper corridor like a polite but miserable procession of people trying not to acknowledge that they need to relieve themselves. Everyone stands just far enough apart to feign disinterest, but close enough to stake their claim on the next available stone hole. You take your place, 4th in line. A knight in an embroidered surcoat stands ahead of you, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he's trying to dance his bladder into submission. Behind you, a lady in waiting hums nervously and fans herself with a piece of parchment that's definitely not a fan. The tension is unbearable. Not because anyone speaks, no one does, but because the silence is too loud. Every cough, every shuffle, every distant splash echoes like a bell tolling for your patience. You wait and wait. The door creaks open. The previous occupant steps out, eyes downcast, face pale, expression neutral, the medieval equivalent of saying, "Let us never speak of this again." The knight ahead disappears through the door. More waiting. A draft sneaks down the corridor. Someone clears their throat. You try not to breathe through your nose. Someone else emerges. Your turn. The door is still warm from the last body. The stone seat is damp. You try not to consider why. There's a fresh scent in the air, not of cleanliness, but of someone's desperate attempt to mask reality with crushed rosemary. It smells like failure wearing perfume. You settle in, hurriedly. You want to be quick, But someone else is already waiting behind you, and you can feel their judgment burning through the door like heat. The pressure is real. The stone doesn't help, nor does the knowledge that anything you do here will be remembered, if not by name, then certainly by sound. And sound is everything. Because when the castle has guests, the walls listen harder. The halls carry whispers. One wrong splash, one awkward grunt, one accidental clatter of a belt buckle, and suddenly you're the story being whispered over supper. Did you hear? The one from the kitchens sounded like a dying goose. You finish, wipe as best you can with the sad excuse for straw, and step out into the corridor. You meet the eyes of the next person in line. You both pretend this is normal. It isn't. Back at your duties, someone offers you wine. You decline. Someone else makes a joke. You smile too quickly. They don't laugh. Because in the castle, even when you think you're clean, you're not. Especially when the guests are still here. And tonight they're staying over. There comes a moment, usually at night, sometimes during a storm, occasionally when you're just too tired to care, when the tower stairs feel like too much. Your knees protest. Your spine reminds you it's seen better centuries. Your stomach lurches, but your soul whispers, not again, not up there. And that's when the bucket becomes an option. You didn't mean to resort to it. Nobody ever does. But the bucket is there, lurking in the corner of the storage room. Short, wooden, slightly cracked, and always faintly damp in a way that defies physics. It is not a proud choice, but it is a practical one. So, tonight, in the still hush of pre-dawn misery, you fetch it. You glance around first, like a thief. But you're not stealing. You're surrendering. You line it with straw, because that's what people say helps. It doesn't. The straw only makes it louder and stranger. But still, you place it down, squat over it like a hesitant gargoyle, and try to pretend this isn't your life. It is. The bucket doesn't make things easier. It makes them immediate. There's no distance, no echo, no fantasy that your contribution to the fortress's waste will be swept away by the wind or forgotten by time. Here, in this small wooden container, is your truth. Warm, unmistakable, and deeply personal. The smell is instant, the regret faster. You finish quickly. Too quickly. Something sloshes. You hope it was just the straw shifting. You tell yourself that twice. You don't believe it either time. Now comes the worst part, the carrying, because the bucket doesn't empty itself, and you can't leave it here. Someone will find it. Someone will remember. And you'll be known not as a cook, or a scribe, or a guard, but as the bucket user, the one who couldn't be bothered with the stairs. You wrap a cloth around the handle, partly to muffle the sound, mostly to preserve the last shreds of your dignity. It leaks anyway. Your fingers grow damp. You try not to think about it, but you do. Of course you do. The walk to the disposal trench is long. Each step feels like a confession. You pass a guard and you nod. He raises an eyebrow. He says nothing. That somehow makes it worse. You descend the stairs slowly, praying the bucket doesn't slosh or betray you with some traitorous drip. It does. Twice. Finally, at the outer edge of the bailey, you reach the trench. It is a channel dug for waste, but it has ambitions. It smells like a festival thrown by bad decisions and forgotten vegetables. You tip the bucket, watching its contents slither out like your self-respect leaving your body. You rinse it. Once. Briefly. It's not clean. It never will be. But you tell yourself it's fine. You place it back in its corner, still wet, still judging. You wipe your hands on your cloak, then wipe your cloak on the back of your cloak, as if layering filth somehow reverses it. You return to your bed. The sun is rising. Your back aches. Your nose twitches. You'll deny the bucket tomorrow. You'll claim you used the tower, like everyone else. And no one will believe you. You've accepted a few things about life in the fortress. The food is bad. The beds are worse. And the privy is not your friend. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares you for what happens when the wind changes direction. Because you can endure the cold. You can endure the draft up your cloak and the sense that you're sitting on a haunted rock. What you cannot endure, what no human should ever have to endure, is the moment when the wind stops blowing outward and decides, without warning, to blow back in. It starts like any other visit. You climb the tower stairs, cursing mildly at each uneven step. You reach the narrow door, half rotten, half frozen shut, and shove it open with a practiced grunt. The sky is overcast, the air is still, and the castle feels unusually quiet, always a bad sign. You step inside the garderobe and lower yourself onto the frigid stone slab with the resignation of someone who has already surrendered to fate. And then it hits you. A gust. A violent, swirling breath from below, like the moat just exhaled its worst secrets directly into your face. You gag. You try not to, but it's too late. Your nose has already registered everything: mold, ammonia, something that smells like burnt soup and betrayal. It coats your tongue, crawls up your throat, settles behind your eyes. You pull your cloak over your nose. It doesn't help. You try to stand, but mid-process, mid-position, there is no graceful exit. The wind comes again. Stronger this time. It rattles the hole like a drum, lifts a curl of straw from the corner, and flings it into the air like it's reenacting a tiny, awful ballet. You realize this is a design flaw, a fatal one. The garderobe was built high to keep waste away from living spaces, but no one considered the whims of the mountain wind. When it howls from the south, it carries your shame far away. But when it shifts from the north, it brings it right back, smiling smugly and asking for seconds. The smell intensifies. You begin to question your life decisions. Why here? Why now? Why boiled onions for dinner last night, knowing they disagree with both your insides and your conscience? You try to speed things up. You can't. The stone is slippery. Your limbs are tense. Your concentration has been scattered by olfactory warfare. You mutter a prayer. The wind mocks you with a whistle. Then comes a sound from below. A wet sort of slap. A faint, bubbling burp, the moat, laughing. You decide then and there that this will be your last visit for the day. You'll hold it next time. You'll find a ditch. You'll walk to the forest and never come back. You finish barely. You stand wobbly, dignity shedding like autumn leaves. You wipe blindly. You pull up your garments like you're fleeing a crime scene. The wind gusts once more as you open the door. It chases you down the stairs like a vengeful spirit. And when you return to the hall, someone sniffs the air and asks, "Did it rain?" You don't answer. Because in a way, yes, it did. The day comes once a month, maybe less, maybe more, depending on the mood of the steward and the density of complaints. It's not marked on the calendar. There is no horn blown, no banner raised. But everyone knows when it arrives, cleaning day. The fortress doesn't suddenly smell better. It smells worse. Much worse. Because now all the layers of misery that have quietly fermented beneath the garderobe for weeks are stirred into motion, scraped loose and scooped into daylight. You don't volunteer. No one does. The task falls, inevitably, on the lowest ranking person available. Today, unfortunately, that person is you. Congratulations. The steward calls your name with all the solemnity of a man handing over a death sentence. You try to protest, but your voice is weak and your excuse is weaker. "I have kitchen duty," you say. "I'm allergic to filth. I have a limp, see." He isn't listening. He hands you a long-handled rake, a pair of wooden clogs, and a bucket that has seen too much. You descend, not into the tower this time, but beneath it, below the stone latrine, below the walls that pretend to keep everything noble, into the cesspit. It isn't a pit so much as a sunken room, dark, damp, and dreadful. The walls weep. The air moves in slow, heavy waves, each one worse than the last. There is no fresh breeze here, no merciful gust, only the oppressive warmth of decay. It's like the inside of a compost heap that gave up on redemption and embraced villainy. Your job is simple. Agitate, scoop, empty, repeat. You begin with the rake. The sludge resists, as though it has a personality and a personal grudge against you. You drag the wooden teeth through it, dislodging things that should never be named. A chunk of something bobs to the surface. It might have once been bread, or fabric, or part of someone's soul. You gag, again, and again. Eventually your body stops trying. It accepts this new reality with the hollow calm of someone who has broken past resistance, and now lives in pure coping. Squelch, scoop, slosh. You fill a bucket, then haul it up the side. Every movement threatens to spill its contents down your leg. The clogs help a little. They keep your feet dry mostly, but your shins, your sleeves, and your spirit soaked. Above, a curious child leans out of the tower window. "Is it bad?" she calls down. You look up, streaked with misery. You don't answer. She shrugs and disappears. You vow, silently, that if you survive this day, you will never eat turnip stew again. The worst part isn't the smell. It's the sound. The slurps, the squishes, the occasional unnatural hiss, as if the cesspit has a voice and an opinion. You listen, not because you want to, but because you must. And every now and then, the waste shifts in a way that makes you wonder if something alive still swims beneath the crust. After 6 trips, you're told it's good enough. You don't ask who decides that. You simply climb out, dump the last of the bucket, and rinse your hands in a barrel of grey water that smells like resignation and dead herbs. You return your tools. You remove the clogs. You sit down. You say nothing, because now you know a truth too many forget. The castle runs on secrets and stone one, but it stands on filth, and someone, always, must clean it. Let's say, just for a moment, you're not a peasant. You're not scrambling up frozen tower stairs with a bucket sloshing against your leg. Instead, you are someone of considerable standing, someone with titles, with servants, with a face that has never been touched by soot unless for ceremonial reasons. You are, for this moment of delightful imagination, the emperor. And emperors do not wipe with straw. You rise in the morning slowly, regally, with great ceremony. Your attendants have already arranged your robes, warmed your shoes by the brazier, and prepared the chamber for your most private business. No dark stone tower, no rat-haunted pit, no communal rag hanging from a nail. Instead, you're led to a chamber behind another chamber so deep within the palace that the birds forget to sing. Here, the air smells faintly of rosewater, cinnamon, and the kind of incense that costs more than most people earn in a year. The floor is tiled. The ceiling is painted. The walls are silk. Even the privy is polite. You are seated on a carved seat, elevated and covered with a silk cushion, which seems absurd until you remember you are absurd. That's your job, to live so luxuriously that even your bodily functions become state secrets. Then comes the cloth. It is not tossed in a corner. It is not handled with a grimace. It is presented by a eunuch on a tray, folded into delicate layers, scented with herbs, embroidered at the edges a piece of silk so soft it could make a cloud feel inadequate. And this is just the beginning. There is an order to things. One cloth for the first pass. A second, thinner one for refinement. A third, warmed by the fire, for what they call the final assurance. You've never questioned it. You've never had to. Sometimes you overhear whispers in the court, murmurs about waste, about excess, about how many silkworms must die so that the emperors behind can feel like it's being kissed by angels. You smile. You sip your tea. You let them whisper. You do not fold the clothes. You do not dispose of them. That task falls to an elite staff of sanitation eunuchs trained in discretion, silence, and scented disposal. They carry the used silks to the back gardens, where they are burned each morning in a fire that smells suspiciously floral. But here's the thing, no one mentions the paranoia. Because when everything is silk and ritual, nothing is truly private. You begin to wonder, after a while, how many people know the exact schedule of your digestion. You suspect the ministers time their bribes according to your regularity. You fear the gossip of servants more than assassins. And there's always the risk, the nightmare scenario, that someone will swap the tray. That one morning, in a moment of chaos or revenge, you will reach for that first delicate wipe and find burlap. You think this is absurd, until it happens. Once, just once. The scream echoes for hours. After that, you demand the chief eunuch inspect every cloth by hand. And so, each morning continues silent, scented, ceremonial. An emperor on a throne within a throne, separated from the rest of humanity by silk, incense, and an army of underpaid witnesses. You are clean. You are exalted. You are profoundly alone. You've finished. The silk cloths, all three, have been used with utmost delicacy. You didn't rush. You never do. To be emperor is to move at your own pace, even when nature calls with a voice loud and inconvenient. And now, like all grand rituals, this one must be completed with grace. Enter the eunuchs. They do not knock. They do not speak. They appear, as they always do, with perfect timing and expressions of men who have seen too much and plan to see more. Their robes are spotless, their movements choreographed, their faces composed into masks of refined disinterest. You sometimes wonder how they train for this. Whether there is an academy somewhere deep in the palace where young eunuchs practice removing used silk from trays with reverence and tongs. One step forward with a silver basin. Not iron. Never iron. You are not a barbarian. Into the basin, the clothes are placed folded once more, not crumpled. Crumpling is for peasants and pirates. The second eunuch sprinkles powdered camphor over them, followed by rose petals, crushed mint, and, if the season allows, dried plum blossom. It's not to mask the scent. No, it's to elevate it. The entire disposal smells better than your childhood bedroom. Still, you watch, because you've learned slowly, over the years, that even luxury has its pitfalls. You remember the burlap incident, the wrong tray, the day your skin met friction it did not deserve. Since then, you've become an observer. You examine every cloth before use. You monitor every departure. You know the names of each disposal eunuch, their shifts, their mothers' surnames, and whether or not they squint under pressure. Today, all seems normal. The clothes are folded. The basin is carried out. You hear the soft bells attached to the procession ring once, as they exit the chamber, the kind of subtle chime that implies dignity and does not invite questions. But you still follow. Not closely. Not with urgency, but enough to watch from afar. You rise, straighten your robes, and trail them through the servants' corridors. You pass walls painted with cranes, floors polished with silent shame, and doors that only open when you aren't looking. The palace breathes like a cat, quiet, aware, always judging. The clothes are taken to the garden furnace. Not just any fire pit, this one is built into a stone lotus, ringed by carved phoenixes and protected by incense sticks that smoulder like forgotten promises. The clothes are placed on a bronze shovel. One eunuch bows. The other lights the fire. There is no cheering, no applause. Just a soft whoosh, a sigh of smoke, and the upward curl of silk's final whisper. You nod. Satisfied. The ritual has been honored. The disposal is complete. But part of you still wonders, what if one day someone doesn't burn them? What if one cloth somewhere survives? What secrets would it carry? You do not ask, because emperors are not supposed to wonder about such things. You simply turn away and let the fire consume the evidence, as it always has, and as it always must. It begins subtly. A faint trail of sandalwood that follows you down the corridor. A breath of jasmine that lingers just a little too long after you rise from your throne. At first, you assume it's the incense, or maybe the new face powder your advisors insisted would soften your expression. But no, this scent is coming from somewhere else entirely. Eventually, you understand. It's your backside, or more precisely, the legacy of the scented silk cloths. They are not just soft, they are aromatic. Each one soaked in a different blend. Lavender and rice milk for calming mornings, orange blossom and myrrh for court appearances, and on feast days, a mixture so potent it smells like a flower bed preparing for war. You didn't ask for this. No emperor ever does. But somewhere along the line, someone decided that if your presence was divine, your exit should be as well. And now, your rear smells like a perfumed altar. This is not a metaphor. People start noticing. Servants bow deeper. Attendants pause as you pass, brows furrowed, trying to identify the fragrance wafting from behind your embroidered robes. One bold official even inquires about the rare floral oil you must be using. You smile faintly, offer a vague nod, and say it's imported, which is technically true. Silk, after all, does come from somewhere else. But it doesn't stop there. Rumors spread. Nobles send servants to the market, searching for the elusive imperial scent. Apothecaries make guesses: crushed violets, powdered pearl, sacred moss. They are wrong, but persistent. One merchant even claims to have bottled the scent and sells it under the name Golden Presence. You try not to laugh, but it's difficult when your backside has inspired a black market perfume. Eventually, someone, probably your cousin, the one with too many opinions, suggests that the scent is too much, that it lingers, that it speaks louder than your decrees. You consider this, you really do. And for one afternoon you request unscented cloths. It is a disaster. You sit in silence. No comforting aroma. No floral buffer. Just you, a silk cloth that smells like nothing, and the creeping suspicion that something is missing from your life. You feel naked. Not physically, you're still swathed in enough silk to sail a ship, but spiritually, aromatically naked. You switch back the next day. Now the scent is part of your persona, as essential as your robes, your fan, your measured walk. Your rear becomes a symbol of opulence, of stability, of an empire so confident in its power that even its lowest regions are bathed in luxury. Sometimes you wonder if this is how power works, not with swords, not with gold, but with fragrance, with whispers that follow you, not about your laws, but about your scent. That subtle reminder, even after you've left the room, that the Emperor was here, and he smelled magnificent. It was meant to be private, your time alone. A daily pause in the storm of scrolls, ambassadors, and ceremonial nodding. But now, you suspect that even your most basic functions are being observed, catalogued, and quietly weaponized. You didn't mean to give away so much, but patterns are powerful, and courtiers are vultures dressed as scholars. It begins with timing. You rise from your main throne, the political one, and excuse yourself with a gentle wave. You disappear into the labyrinth of chambers, headed for the second throne, the personal one. You assume this is a moment only your attendants will notice. You are wrong. The court watches. Always. They notice how long you're gone. They note whether you return with a new robe. They track whether the incense is refreshed. There are whispered debates over what scent signifies what mood. One claims that if your return smells of clove and bergamot, the Emperor is pleased. If it's mint and camphor, there may be executions before lunch. A scribe with too much free time begins charting your lavatory patterns on a wax tablet. He doesn't call it toilet log. He titles it Imperial Rhythm. It's updated daily. You wonder how it got this far, but it gets worse. Ministers begin scheduling their requests around your patterns. The bold ones wait outside the lavatory corridor, hoping to catch you in a moment of reflection. The desperate ones send scrolls addressed to His Most Serene Majesty, keeper of the Eastern incense. One even offers to donate a rare type of silk worm that spins scented threads, presumably to improve the posteriors of the empire. There is no escape. Your private hour becomes strategy fodder. If you delay your visit, they panic. If you skip a day, rumors fly. He is ill, someone whispers. He is making a statement, says another. He has become unclean, mutters a third, with the reverence of someone discussing holy rot. One evening, you delay your usual visit just to test the theory. By midnight, the palace is vibrating with speculation. 3 officials have submitted contradicting policy proposals based on the Emperor's restraint. A servant claims to have seen a red bird fly in a circle, which must be connected. Your cousin faints dramatically and demands an exorcism, all because you didn't go. You consider returning to normal, keeping to your pattern. It's easier that way, less interpretive. But you can't help feeling that you've lost something, that your most human ritual has become another lever in the Empire's machine. Even the eunuchs now bow a little differently, with just a hint more awareness. Sometimes you fantasize about vanishing into the countryside, disguised, anonymous, relieving yourself under a tree untracked, unscented, unobserved. But then, of course, you remember the straw and the wind, and you sigh. You sit back on your golden throne, nod to a trembling minister, and prepare to receive another petition, this one folded inside a silk cloth, scented with desperate ambition. You may not think about it. In fact, you probably go to great lengths not to think about it. The silk cloths arrive perfectly folded, presented on silver trays, stitched at the edges with little golden cranes and quiet lotus blossoms. They smell like powdered heaven and feel like apologies from the gods. You assume, because it is more comfortable to do so, that they simply appear, but they do not. Somewhere in the quieter corridors of the palace far from the thrones, the incense, the perfumed fires someone is stitching, bent over a low table, needle in hand, thread between teeth, back curved like a question mark that no one answers. She doesn't speak much. She isn't supposed to. Speaking implies she might have opinions, and no one wants the opinions of the woman who embroiders your, let's call them exit linens. Her name is forgotten in most records, but in the work logs, she's listed simply as embroideress, class III, sanitary. Her chamber is small. Her window opens onto a wall. She works by candlelight, hunched in silence, embroidering your luxury with the precision of a saint and the resignation of a gardener watching his best squash fall into the mud. The patterns are not her choice. Each cloth must carry a certain motif, cranes, peonies, or abstract swirls meant to reflect the movement of divine clarity. She isn't told what the patterns mean, only that they must be symmetrical, invisible when folded, and never stitched with dark thread. Dark thread suggests ominous things, like ulcers or rebellion. She works fast. She must. You use at least 3 clothes a day, more on feast days. More still when the court is tense, which is always. Each one must be perfect yet disposable, like a poem carved into snow. Sometimes she wonders if you notice, if your royal fingers trace the stitching, if your royal eye recognizes the faint curve of the crane's wing, stitched just a little off one day when her hand cramped. Probably not. Probably you assume the silk arrives embroidered by clouds or some highly trained bird, but still she cares. Each stitch is placed carefully, not out of loyalty, not even out of pride, but out of routine, that quiet, stubborn thing that keeps the world turning while no one looks. When her candle burns low, she finishes one last cloth and folds it gently. Tomorrow it will be wiped away. It will carry what it must and then be burned with dignity and perfume. Her work will rise in a curl of fragrant smoke, noticed only by the eunuch assigned to ensure proper ash texture. She will start again. Another cloth. Another stitch. Another day when softness, delicacy, and grace are created only to be obliterated, smudged, discarded, and forgotten. You, meanwhile, will sit on your throne. You will unfold the cloth. You will nod at its softness, and never once wonder who sewed the little crane flying away from you. You never expect it. You're the emperor. You've never been denied anything, not peaches in winter, not music at midnight, not a 4th nap before breakfast. So when you enter your private chamber and reach for the tray, you expect silk. You always expect silk. Warmed, scented, embroidered silk. But the tray is empty. At first you think it's a mistake, a delay, a momentary lapse in routine. You clear your throat, softly, just once. A signal, subtle but unmistakable. Nothing happens. You stare at the tray. It stares back. Empty. The most offensive piece of silver you've ever seen. You ring the bell. 2 eunuchs appear. They bow. You do not rise. You do not speak. You only gesture a slight flick of the wrist toward the tray that should not be naked. They glance. Their expressions remain calm, but you notice it. The slight widening of their eyes. The subtle stiffening of posture. This is not normal. This is not good. They vanish like smoke. You wait. You are not accustomed to waiting. Time, for you, is something that moves around your schedule, not the other way around. But now you sit unclean, uncomfortable, and increasingly concerned as the moments stretch like poorly made noodles. Eventually, someone returns. A steward, sweating through layers of silk meant for ceremony, not crisis. He kneels too quickly and explains breathless, stammering that the shipment of raw silk was delayed. The embroidery chamber has been locked for fumigation. The scented oils have been miscounted. There was, apparently, a pigeon-related incident. You lose track somewhere between sabotaged loom and accidental fire. You do not care. You need a cloth. Now, a decision must be made. The steward offers options. Cotton, unembellished. Fragrant but plain. You raise an eyebrow. He adds, linen, coarsely woven. You raise the other eyebrow. A final offer, paper. You do not blink. He retreats. The eunuchs return, this time with a folded cloth of unfamiliar texture. You touch it. It is not silk, not even close. It feels like betrayal softened by panic. Still, you are desperate. You use it. Slowly, carefully, resentfully. It chafes. Not physically, not quite, but emotionally. It reminds you of when you were 8 and your tutor made you write calligraphy on paper that bled ink and shame. This is worse. This is a royal disgrace in cloth form. You finish. You rise. You dress. You do not speak. Word spreads quickly. By evening, the palace hums with alarm. New shipments are ordered from 3 provinces. Backup reserves are discovered in a sealed cabinet behind a portrait of your great-uncle. The embroidery chamber triples its staff. A new tray arrives before sunset, glinting, perfumed, burdened with apology. You do not smile. You use it, but you do not smile. Because now you know. Now the illusion is cracked. Even the emperor can run out. And once you've touched the backup cloth, you never forget how it felt. It was bound to happen. When your rear becomes a symbol of national pride, perfumed, pampered, swaddled in the empire's finest silk, someone, somewhere, is going to want a piece of it. Not literally, thankfully, but the clothes, the scent, the aura. The idea that luxury isn't real unless it's been near your backside. At first, it's just rumours. A noble's cousin boasts, perhaps too loudly, that he's acquired a genuine imperial cloth used, of course, because authenticity matters. Another swears he's bought a batch of royal surplus wipes, stamped with the seal of the House of Endless Cleanliness. You laugh. Then you pause. Because seals can be forged, and envy is a powerful solvent. The palace begins receiving letters, strange ones. Requests from governors, generals, and even foreign emissaries, asking for ceremonial hygiene tokens as symbols of goodwill. One duke sends a poem. It's terrible, but flattering. It ends with the line, "If I cannot touch the throne, may I at least know what kissed it last." You almost admire the audacity. Then comes the scandal. A servant low-ranking, soft-footed, too curious, is caught sneaking toward the laundry chamber with a rolled cloth hidden in his robe. It isn't embroidered. It isn't perfumed. But it's made of silk, and that's enough. He claims he intended to study it, or frame it, or pray to it. His story shifts like oil on a hot pan. It doesn't matter. He's arrested. Interrogation reveals more. There's a network, small, desperate, and absurd. Servants trading bits of used cloth for coins, favours, occasionally dumplings. Someone has been trimming the edges and selling the scraps to superstitious merchants. A square inch of imperial purity, the flyers say, guaranteed to cleanse your karma and your conscience. You're not sure whether to be furious or flattered. The eunuchs are, predictably, horrified. Protocols are rewritten overnight. The disposal fire is now watched by 2 guards and a 3rd official, whose only job is to verify ash. Cloth trays are sealed. Cloth burners are rotated to prevent bribery. Even the embroiderer's quiet, stooped, rarely spoken to is questioned, gently but thoroughly. She says nothing. She always says nothing. One advisor suggests branding the clothes with a hidden symbol, visible only under vinegar. Another proposes adding a bitter tasting resin to discourage theft. You ask who exactly is tasting the clothes. No one answers. Eventually it dies down, mostly, but the damage is done. You begin to sense eyes lingering too long on the silver tray. Attendants bow slightly lower when placing it. Ministers sniff subtly when you pass. You imagine them wondering, is that the real scent? The real cloth? Does he still use them? Or has he switched to cotton like a common merchant? It doesn't matter, of course. You're still the emperor. But now, even in the quietest moments, a thought echoes. Somewhere, someone is selling pieces of your discarded silk for profit. and someone else is buying them, clutching them, sniffing them, possibly displaying them in a lacquered box, labeled divine hygiene. You do your business. You ring the bell. You nod at the tray. But you fold the cloth yourself now. Just once. Just to be sure. It's easy to forget what happens after you wipe. Not because you're forgetful, but because you're royal. Wiping is a beginning, not an end. There is no awkward shuffle to a barrel. No panic about where the waste goes. You press silk to skin, drop it onto the tray, and ring a bell. It vanishes like a magician's handkerchief, absorbed by a system built on discretion, fire, and denial. But today, for reasons unclear and likely unfortunate, you are led to the disposal chamber. They tell you it's ceremonial, a rare inspection, a gesture of transparency to show the imperial household runs cleanly both in ethics and in ash. You nod, outwardly composed, inwardly puzzled. You've never been this far into the eastern wing. The corridor smells of soap and damp gilt. The tiles are cleaner than anywhere else in the palace. Too clean. Suspiciously clean. Like they've been scrubbed by people who fear audits. A eunuch walks ahead, holding a bell. He does not ring it. You enter the chamber. It is quiet. Not spiritually quiet, more like the kind of quiet that furniture makes when it's witnessed something unpleasant and agreed never to speak of it again. There's a raised stone pit in the center, shaped like a wide-mouthed flower. Around it, 3 attendants stand with ladles, brushes, and expressions that suggest their emotions have been replaced with incense. At the far end sits the firekeeper. His eyebrows are gone burned off, perhaps, or maybe they just gave up. His robe is scorched in patterns that imply long hours and poor ventilation. He bows slowly, with the reverence of someone welcoming a deity into a broom closet. You are handed a tray. On it, 3 used cloths carefully folded. Yours, of course they are. A clerk steps forward with a scroll and begins reciting the ingredients of each, not just the herbs and scents, but also the source of the silk, the region where the embroidery thread was spun, and the astrological alignment during the cloth's folding. You listen. You wonder if this is punishment. Then the burning begins. 1 cloth at a time, placed gently on a bronze shovel, carried to the flame, ignited with a slender taper soaked in holy oil. The smoke rises in a delicate spiral, tinged with lavender and faint moral discomfort. You're told to watch. You do. And then, as the last cloth curls into fragrant ash, a ceremonial ladle is dipped into water and flicked 3 times over the coals. The fire hisses like it's offended. The ashes are gathered, not thrown away, weighed, measured, recorded, placed into a lacquered jar labelled with today's date, your name, and the symbol for completion. The jar is sealed and placed in a chamber with hundreds of others, stretching back generations. You are told, thus we maintain the purity of record. You nod, but inside something stirs. You wonder how many jars there are. How many emperors reduced to scented soot? You wonder what future hands might open them. You wonder if, after all, nothing is ever truly gone. You return to your room. You use the cloth. You fold it. You ring the bell. And you think for just a moment about where it will go. It is said that diplomacy begins with a handshake and ends with a toast. But in your experience, it more often ends in confusion, cultural confusion, to be precise, and nothing breeds confusion like bathroom customs. You've hosted warlords, priests, envoys, and philosophers, and yet, despite the scrolls and the interpreters and the lavish banquets, nothing creates more awkward silence than a visiting dignitary reaching for the wrong cloth. Today is no exception. The ambassador from the Western Isles has arrived. He bows too stiffly, wears boots indoors, and eats olives without removing the pits. But worst of all, and this is confirmed by horrified eunuchs, and at least one trembling scribe, he attempted to use the decorative towel near the washing basin, the one with embroidered dragons, the one meant for hands, not rear. The court erupts. Quietly, of course, with measured gasps and discreet coughs. The towel is removed like a body at a crime scene, folded with tongs, burned behind the kitchens, and later mourned with a bowl of plum wine. You are informed of the incident over tea. You sip, you nod, you do not react, because this is not the first time. The prince from the northern steppes once demanded a basin, not for washing, but for squatting, mid-corridor. His guards stood in a circle and sang. You had the tiles replaced. The jarred ash was labelled Incident 14. A philosopher from across the sea proudly displayed his reusable linen squares and asked where he might hang them to dry. You granted him a private pavilion, and then sealed it. Forever. The issue is not malice. It is ignorance. They do not know. They do not understand that wiping, in your palace, is an act of elegance, a ritual, a scent-based meditation on mortality and softness. To reach for the wrong cloth is not just a faux pas, it is a philosophical misstep. So, you take measures. A new scroll is drafted, guidelines for visiting delegates regarding imperial hygiene. It is 12 feet long and written in 3 languages. The eunuchs rehearse it like a play. A diagram is commissioned. It features a cheerful crane pointing to the correct cloth and a frowning dragon glaring at the decorative ones. The message is clear: do not anger the dragon. Still, mistakes happen. One guest, attempting to show off, claims he uses silk at home, too. He brings a sample. It is coarse. It is scented with something described as smoked citrus. It smells like arrogance and boiled bark. The palace physician faints upon contact. You smile, politely, and gift the ambassador a set of true imperial clothes. He weeps. You suspect it's from embarrassment, or possibly the camphor. Later, alone, you reflect. It's not superiority you feel. Not exactly, but there is something satisfying in knowing that your kingdom, despite its flaws and its politics and its endless scrolls, has perfected at least one thing: the clean, silent, dignified handling of a private matter. And in the end, isn't that the mark of true civilization? Nothing lasts forever. Not emperors. Not dynasties. Not even silk. It starts subtly, the way all things end. One morning, as you lift the first cloth from the tray, your fingers notice a change. A softness that feels too soft, as if the threads have surrendered. The edges are frayed, no longer crisp. The embroidery of the crane leans a little to the left, as if tired of flying. The scent, though still pleasant, carries the faintest note of age, like dried herbs in a forgotten jar, or perfume clinging to the hem of a widow's robe. You hesitate. You, who have never questioned a cloth. You, who have lifted and wiped and discarded with regal confidence. Now you pause. You finish, of course. You're not about to cause a scandal over wear and tear, but when the eunuch arrives to remove the tray, you don't ring the bell immediately. Instead, you ask softly, curiously, how long that cloth had been in circulation. He hesitates. That hesitation tells you everything. Later that day, you receive a report. Apparently, the cloth in question was one of the original 1000 Lotus batch, a legendary production made during the previous emperor's reign, spun from silk gathered on a full moon, dyed with crushed azaleas, blessed by a monk who no longer speaks. Most of that batch has been retired, but a few, deemed too exquisite to burn, had been preserved, stored, and in this case, quietly reintroduced into the rotation. You are horrified, and oddly sentimental. A meeting is called, not with generals or governors, but with the sanitation staff, the embroideress, the storage master, and the monk who still does not speak, but makes very meaningful gestures. Together you discuss cloth longevity, burn rates, ethical folding. There are debates about symbolism, about reuse, about whether silk with memory is sacred or dangerous. Eventually, it is agreed the cloth must be retired, not burned, not buried, but honoured. A ceremony is prepared. You wear white, the colour of reverence and mild discomfort. The cloth, now cleansed and folded, is placed in a lacquered box. Incense is lit. Drums are played, slowly, as if mourning a noble animal. You say a few words. Nothing elaborate. Just, it's served. Then the box is lowered into a marble niche in the hall of ceremonial cloths, where it will rest beside others aged, used, remembered. You feel strange afterward. Not sad. Not exactly. But marked. You realize, perhaps for the first time, that the clothes are not just clothes. They are your quiet companions, your daily constants, witnesses to your most vulnerable moments, silently absorbing what you never say aloud. You ask the embroideress to create a new batch. She nods. This time she uses gold thread for the crane's wings. Just a touch. Not enough to flaunt, but enough to acknowledge that time has passed. The next morning, a new tray arrives. You unfold the cloth. It is soft, crisp. It smells of beginnings. You smile, just slightly, and sit. You arrive at the latrine with hope. You always do. Hope that maybe this time it will be quiet. Maybe this time the seat will be dry. Maybe this time no one will be making direct eye contact across the bench while holding a fig. You are always wrong. The Roman public toilet is not a sanctuary. It is a theatre. A long stone bench, punctuated by keyhole-shaped openings, lines the walls like a row of judgmental mouths. Beneath the bench, a water channel gurgles steadily, a constant reminder that everything flows, especially dignity. There are no partitions, no privacy, no doors to close behind you and imagine a better world. Only stone and other people, and the endless performance of pretending this is normal. You choose a seat, not because it's clean. None of them is clean. You choose it because it's slightly less wet, slightly less warm, and far enough from the loud man at the end who's explaining grain tariffs while loudly relieving himself. The stone is cold. Then, suspiciously warm. You don't dwell on that. Beside you sits the sponge stick. It leans casually in a bucket of vinegar water, looking far too comfortable with itself. A wooden rod, topped with a sad clump of sponge that has seen too much. This is not your personal sponge. This is the sponge. Everyone's sponge. The communal cleaner. The shared implement of shame. You stare at it the way a condemned man might stare at the axe, with resignation and a bit of disbelief. Someone beside you reaches for it, swishes it in the bucket, uses it, puts it back. No rinsing. No farewell. Just a nod and a return to conversation. You begin to question everything. How did this become the standard? Was there a vote? A decree? A strange emperor with ideas? The historians argue. Some say the vinegar disinfects. Others believe it was just a ritual. You, at this moment, are less concerned with sanitation theory and more with the realization that you are about to share an object with 12 strangers and their questionable lunch choices. You try to wait. You try to time your moment so that you might somehow get the sponge at its cleanest, a theoretical window of one wipe after the vinegar and before the meat stew reasserts itself. But there is no perfect timing, only inevitability. You swish, you wipe, you place it back. You do not cry, but your soul makes a small noise. Conversation continues around you. People gossip, argue and eat. Yes, eat. A man unwraps a bit of bread. Someone passes a fig. You consider yelling. You consider becoming a monk. But instead, you just adjust your tunic and shuffle off the bench, 1 inch taller in shame and 1 metaphor shorter in dignity. You walk back to your quarters and try not to think about what you've touched. You fail. You wash your hands with cold water and a leaf. It helps nothing. You lie awake that night and wonder who invented the sponge stick, and more importantly, who didn't stop them. You ask a question quietly because you've learned not to raise your voice in the latrina. Is this normal? The man beside you nods solemnly. Traditio, he says, with the grave tone usually reserved for family funerals or extremely expensive cheese. You nod back, because that's what people do when something terrible has become tradition. They bow to it, grit their teeth, pretend it's sacred. But somewhere in the dim part of your mind still capable of independent thought, the question festers, is this hygienic? Is this ritual? Or have you all been duped by a wooden stick and a vinegar bucket? The theories are many. The answers few. You've heard the public arguments. A senator once stood in the forum and declared that vinegar is the cleanser of both body and spirit. He had a sponge in one hand and a scroll in the other, waving both as if they were sacred artifacts. People clapped. A child vomited. It was a memorable speech. Another philosopher always hunched, always smelling faintly of lentils and disaster, insists that the sponge is symbolic. That to share one is to share burdens. You do not simply clean, he mutters, you connect. You suspect he just likes watching people squirm. Others claim it was all a joke that got wildly out of hand. That the first sponge was meant as a prank, left by a builder with a warped sense of humour and no interest in consequences. But Romans love order. And if you repeat something enough times, someone will eventually write it on marble. You try to understand. You go to the library. You ask a scholar. He shows you a mosaic depicting a sponge on a stick, solemnly carried by a servant beside a basket of olives. The servant looks as miserable as you feel. You ask for clarity. He says, it's debated. You ask if it worked. He shrugs. Define worked. So you run your own test. One morning you arrive early. First in the latrina, the sponge untouched, the vinegar still sharp in the air. You use it, deliberately, carefully. You wait, you examine. And for a brief moment you feel nothing. No disease, no burning, no divine judgment. It is, perhaps, tolerable. You almost feel hope. Then someone bursts in, grabs the sponge, wipes with vigour, and puts it back with the wet slap of a man unconcerned with legacy. The moment is shattered. You never return before sunrise again. Later, around a communal stew pot, someone asks you if you think the sponge is safe. You chew slowly. You answer honestly, no, but it's safer than asking questions. Because in Rome, hygiene is half cleanliness, half performance. And the sponge fowl, flawed, fermented, is the centerpiece of a very strange play. You wonder, often, if anyone will ever write about this. If, centuries from now, scholars will puzzle over the sponge stick, debate its meaning, argue its intent. You hope they do. Because then, at least, you won't have suffered in silence. You may think your job is bad. Maybe you carry bricks. Maybe you clean floors. Maybe you walk behind horses and collect their opinions in pile form. But even at your lowest, even when your tunic is soaked in sweat and regret, you can still say this. At least you're not the sponge boy. He's already at the latrina when you arrive. Not because he loves it, but because it opens before dawn and someone has to prep the vinegar buckets. He is small, quiet, and smells like resignation marinated in old cloth. His name doesn't matter, most people don't use it. They just call him Sponge Boy, often with a grimace or a quick hand wave that means, thank you for what you do, but please never touch me. His first task is rinsing. The sponges, several dozen, in various states of soggy collapse, must be swished, squeezed, and inspected. Any with holes are retired. Retired here means flung over the latrina wall into a ditch where nothing grows and even crows refuse to land. He lines up the fresh ones, plumping them like someone preparing grapes for an emperor who's lost his appetite. Then he fills the buckets. Vinegar, water, sometimes salt, depending on who's supervising. He stirs with a stick longer than his leg. It splashes. It always splashes. People begin arriving. They do not greet him. They do not make eye contact. Some speak as though he isn't there discussing politics, trade deals, gladiator scandals while he stands inches away holding a dripping sponge. Sometimes someone drops the stick. Sometimes it rolls. Sometimes it bounces into a corner and no one wants to retrieve it. That's his job too. He walks over, picks it up, wipes it off with a cloth that was once white, places it back in the bucket like a priest laying down a relic. And then he waits, because the worst part isn't the vinegar. It isn't the smell, though the smell has formed a permanent cloak around him that even dogs shy away from. The worst part is the waiting. Standing by while others use the facilities, listening, not by choice, by proximity. His ears are not loyal to him anymore. They have heard too much, far too much. At midday he eats, alone, usually flatbread and something pickled, sometimes a boiled egg if the gods are smiling. He doesn't use his hands without washing them first. His standards may be low, but they still exist. A sponge boy has pride. It is small, damp, and lives in his shirt pocket, but it's there. In the afternoon, he does rounds, checks the buckets, swaps the worst offenders, Colex used sticks and sets them aside for deep cleaning, a process that involves more vinegar, more rinsing, and a stare of silent loathing that he directs at the universe. At sunset, he leaves. No one thanks him. No one notices. He walks home in the shadow of temples, past nobles who hold perfumed cloths to their noses as he passes. But when morning comes, he'll be there again. Because someone has to stir the vinegar. You thought the sponge was just for cleaning. A tool. A necessity. A shared tragedy held together by damp hope and splinters. But the Romans, being Romans, found ways to make even the sponge a vessel of meaning. Not just hygiene, but healing. Not merely wiping, but warding. In their minds, vinegar and sponge could cure anything, provided you believed hard enough and didn't mind smelling like pickled regret. The theories multiply faster than fleas in a bathhouse. Some say vinegar purifies. It kills disease, banishes bad humours, and scares away invisible spirits that sneak into your body through the lower exit. A sponge soaked in it is a kind of talisman absorbent, not just in cloth, but in purpose. To wipe with it is to cleanse both flesh and fate. You try to believe this. You really do. A merchant once tried to sell you a personal sponge, smaller than usual, dyed red and strung with bronze beads. He whispered that it could cure nightmares. You declined. Politely. But now, when you wake sweating and anxious, you wonder. There's the senator who insists his hemorrhoids vanished after switching to goat vinegar and a softer sponge made from imported moss. He tells everyone. Often. You do not ask. He tells you anyway. The sponge, he says, is a friend if treated kindly. You wish you had never made eye contact. Then there is the story, possibly legend, possibly a very real mistake, of the noblewoman who wore a sponge on a necklace, believing it would prevent betrayal. Her husband ran off with the laundress. The sponge turned black and fell apart. "See," she said, "it warned me." You find this both comforting and extremely unhelpful. Sponge rituals abound. Some rub it on the doorframe before childbirth. Some place it under pillows to prevent theft, unclear whether the sponge wards off thieves or simply smells bad enough to repel them. Soldiers carry sponge charms in their boots. One legion claimed that marching with a sponge tucked under each arm prevented dysentery. More likely it just made them walk funnier and keep to themselves. You try one of the milder customs. Before an important meeting, you dab a clean sponge soaked in rosemary vinegar on your wrists. It's said to bring clarity and discourage liars. The man across from you immediately promises to triple your taxes. You conclude it does not discourage liars. It merely emboldens them. Still, part of you wants to believe. The sponge is ridiculous. It's soaked in fluids and shared among strangers. It carries the weight of too many unspoken events. And yet, it persists a symbol, somehow, of order, of continuity, of wiping things away and beginning again, however briefly, however imperfectly. You look at the bucket. You watch the vinegar swirl. You wonder how many superstitions were born not from belief, but from desperation, from people clinging to anything, even a sponge, because they had so little else. You reach for it, and you think, if nothing else, maybe it'll keep the nightmares away tonight. You've made peace with many things. The lack of privacy, the communal bench, the shared sponge that passes strangers like a torch in a relay no one wants to win. But winter is something else entirely, because when the temperature drops in Rome, the stone does not simply get cold, it becomes hostile. And the sponge, soaking in its vinegar bath like a smug sea creature, becomes an implement of frost and betrayal. You wake before dawn. You shouldn't have to. No one should wake up while stars are still visible and frost clings to the tips of your sandals like desperate barnacles. But nature is indifferent to your dignity. You wrap yourself in your heaviest cloak, which is roughly as effective as draping a cold tablecloth over a freezing fish. The streets are silent. The fountains drip slowly, like they've reconsidered their enthusiasm for movement. By the time you reach the latrina, your extremities are debating a strike. The door is slightly ajar. No warmth greets you, just the scent of vinegar and old ghosts. You lower yourself onto the bench with the caution of someone negotiating with a bear. The stone greets you without mercy. It does not yield. It does not welcome. It simply exists, like a frozen judgment. You sit. You regret. You reach for the sponge. It is colder than logic, colder than treachery, colder than your mother-in-law's compliments. You hold it gingerly, like a snake made of ice and bad decisions. The vinegar, once sharp and tangy, now stings with winter's cruelty. It's the kind of cold that feels personal. That crawls up your spine and into your brain, whispering, "Why did we ever leave the fire?" You brace yourself. You wipe. There is no numbness, that's a myth. A lie spread by Stoics and people with better circulation. You feel everything. You feel the sponge, the vinegar, the universe laughing softly in the distance. Your eyes water. You don't cry, but it's close. You set the sponge down with the reverence of someone parting from a troublesome friend. A man enters. He grunts a greeting. You nod. He lowers himself onto the next stone seat and immediately yelps. You share a moment of mutual recognition. No words are needed, only pain and respect. You both sit in silence, pretending this is fine, pretending the sponge is still your ally, pretending your insides didn't just retract like frightened turtles. This is Roman dignity, suffering with posture. Afterward you stand. Slowly, carefully. The stone clings to you with one last frosty farewell. You wrap your cloak tighter, which does nothing. You step out into the wind, which mocks your optimism. You walk home, and all the while, you repeat one phrase under your breath: spring is coming. Spring is coming. Spring is coming. But it isn't. Not today. Today the sponge has won. It's early afternoon. The sun filters through the clouds like an apology, not warm, not helpful, just vaguely there. You've eaten a modest meal of lentils, barley, and regret. You've finished your errands. And now, your body has remembered something it can no longer postpone. So you make your way to the latrina. The path is familiar, the rhythm predictable. You expect the usual, a bench, a breeze, a faint waft of vinegar and shame. But today, something is wrong. You sense it before you see it. A hush clings to the air, not the usual hushed indifference of shared discomfort, but the sharper silence of disbelief. You round the corner. You look. The sponge stick is gone. Not missing in a metaphorical sense. Not late or drying, or just misplaced in a better-smelling bucket. No, the sponge, the one sponge, the shared implement of Rome's curious civic cohesion, has vanished. In its place, a sloshing bucket, half full of cold vinegar, and a vacant corner of stone that now looks oddly naked. You freeze. Around you, others have noticed. A man clutches his tunic with one hand and the air with the other. A woman hovers near the bench, her expression a complex mixture of urgency, disbelief, and betrayal. No one speaks above a whisper. The sponge is not merely absent, it has left a hole in the world. An absence too specific to ignore. Maybe it fell. Someone ventures. They check. It didn't. Maybe someone took it to clean. The silence that follows is thick enough to slice. No one cleans the sponge. The vinegar is the cleaning. To suggest more is blasphemy, or worse, logic. Panic, of course, is inevitable. Quiet panic. Respectable panic. Roman panic. Everyone tries to act like they're fine, that they didn't really need to go, that they were just here for the ambience. But you can see it in their shifting feet, their slightly clenched jaws, their eyes darting toward the vinegar bucket like it might reveal a secret compartment. Someone proposes improvisation. We could use a cloth. A gasp. A horrified shuffle backward. One man clutches his coin pouch protectively, as though even suggesting individual wiping might summon the tax collector. Another person suggests going home. They laugh, not a joyful laugh, but the brittle, cracking kind of laugh that often precedes either crying or revolution. Then someone enters young, breathless, red-faced, holding the sponge. He lifts it like a trophy. It was in the drainage channel, he says, panting. Rolled there, somehow. Still intact. Bit of grit, but intact. The entire room exhales at once. He places it back in the bucket. There's a pause just a second before someone steps forward, lifts it carefully and sits. Life resumes. You wait your turn. When it comes, you use the sponge with a strange mix of relief and quiet horror. It is exactly as you remember, damp, sour, communal, slightly gritty. But this time you whisper, "Don't go missing again," as you return it to the bucket. And you mean it. Desperation, you learn, has a peculiar smell, a mix of vinegar, whetstone, and the faint hint of someone trying very hard to look calm while holding a leaf. Not all days in Rome allow for a sponge. Sometimes it's gone. Sometimes it's unapproachable. Sometimes it's been used by the loud man with a cough that sounds contagious and a wiping technique that violates the gods. On these days you consider alternatives. The first is the leaf. You think it's a good idea. Nature. Soft. Abundant. What could go wrong? Many things. For starters, not all leaves are created equal. Some are too small. Some are too brittle. One is, apparently, mildly poisonous. You learn this from a friend who tried using it and spent 2 days in the apothecary's care, describing the sensation as like sitting on angry bees. You choose carefully. A broad leaf. Fresh. Slightly damp. You fold it twice. It tears. You try again. This time, success. Sort of. You use it. It works. Mostly. But then the question becomes, what now? There is no disposal pit. No leaf bucket. You cannot hand it to a eunuch like a tray of offerings. You do what everyone does, pretend you dropped something, casually shuffle it behind the bench, and never speak of it again. Next, there are pebbles. Someone no one admits who once claimed that smooth river stones were used in the old days. You are skeptical, but also very motivated. You find a few. Round, polished, innocent. You try one. It is not a pleasant experience. You do not feel clean. You feel challenged. As if hygiene has become a duel, and the stone is winning. The worst part is what comes after. The disposal. You can't throw it back in the river. That feels immoral. You can't reuse it. That feels unwise. So you bury it, like a tiny shameful secret. Some people use cloth, not silk. Never silk. That is for emperors and liars. This cloth is coarse, ripped from old tunics or stolen laundry. It works. It works well. But now you have another problem: evidence. Unlike the sponge, which is shared and thus no one's fault, the cloth is yours. Its use is a confession. You must burn it, bury it, pretend it never existed. One man swears by sand. You do not try sand. Another swears by simply not wiping. You stop speaking to him. Eventually you return to the sponge. Not because it's perfect, but because it's predictable, because it has rules. Because it's there in its vinegar bath, like an old friend who may be awful but is reliably awful. You dip it. You wipe. You return it to the bucket. And as you wash your hands or pretend to, you marvel at the human capacity for compromise. You think of the pebbles, the leaves, the desperate, stony innovations of people who simply wanted to be clean. You don't judge them. You just hope the sponge is still there tomorrow. The rumor spreads like fire through dry scrolls. The emperor is coming, not to wage war, not to inspect legions, not even to address the Senate. No, he's coming to inspect the public latrina. At first, no one believes it. Why would he? Surely he has his own private chamber, carved from marble, perfumed with imported oils, where silk cloths fall from the sky like ashamed clouds. Surely he doesn't need to squat beside merchants and bricklayers and men who think sandals are optional. But the rumor persists, grows teeth, and then, at last, is confirmed by a man in gold who arrives ahead of the imperial entourage and sneezes into a linen square embroidered with a phoenix. Panic begins immediately. The bench is scrubbed, not lightly, not ceremonially, scrubbed like it owes someone money. Buckets of water are hauled in. Soap appears, real soap, not just sand and wishful thinking. Someone applies wine vinegar to the floor for scent, though it mostly smells like a bakery that gave up. The drainage trench is cleared. A rat is evicted with full honours. The stone seats are wiped so thoroughly they shine, which is unnerving. And the sponge. It is replaced. Not just cleaned. Replaced. The new sponge arrives on a tray. A real tray, carried by a trembling boy who walks as though transporting a religious artifact. The sponge is plush, pink, fragrant. You are told it was soaked in a mixture of fig vinegar, rose petals, and something called unicorn moss, which sounds suspiciously invented. It rests in its own bucket, lined with fresh laurel leaves. Someone whispers that the laurel ward off evil spirits. Someone else whispers that the real evil spirit is whoever suggested using just one sponge. Because then comes the question no one wants to ask, will he share? Surely not. Surely the emperor brings his own. But then, the sun breaks through the clouds, the horns sound, and the imperial party arrives 30 men in sandals and polished armor, a dozen scribes, 4 poets, 1 man whose only job is to carry incense. And at the center, seated in a sedan chair carried by people who never blink, is the emperor. He nods. He is helped down. He walks forward. He surveys the bench, the sponge, the laurel bucket, the trembling citizens trying to pretend this is normal. He does not speak. He simply raises a finger. An attendant approaches, holding a second sponge, wrapped in silk. Fragrant. Custom. The emperor does not share. He uses his sponge with quiet precision. The bench does not creak. The wind stills. A dog nearby sits down and stares, confused but reverent. Then, in one smooth motion, the emperor drops the sponge into a separate bucket and leaves. The public sponge is untouched. A man sighs. "We cleaned for nothing," he says. "But you disagree, because for one brief moment, the latrina was beautiful. You hear it before you see it. A slow, sullen, gurgling sound, the kind that suggests water moving in the wrong direction. Not a rush, not a splash, but a sort of liquid reconsideration. By the time you reach the latrina, it has become a problem. By the time you step inside, it has become a memory you'll never quite shake. The flood has come. Not a mighty river surge. Not Poseidon's vengeance. No, this is worse. This is internal. From within. A backflow of Roman engineering. Someone, somewhere, flushed too much ambition into the drainage trench. The trench, insulted, has replied. With volume. The floor is wet. Not damp wet. The bench is slick. The stones shine with a sheen that is neither dew nor dignity. But the worst part isn't the floor. The worst part is the sponge. It floats. It floats like a deflated dream, bobbing gently in a puddle of communal failure. It drifts in slow, lazy circles, as if performing for an audience that has long since lost its sense of humour. The vinegar bucket is overturned. The laurel leaves from the emperor's visit are soggy and stuck to the ceiling, somehow. The smell is indescribable, which is a mercy. Someone has placed a broken amphora in the doorway to block more visitors from stepping inside, but it's too late. People have seen. People have spoken. Word spreads. The sponge is adrift, they whisper. The trench has revolted. No one wants to investigate further. You certainly don't. You consider walking away. You've walked away from worse awkward conversations. Suspicious stew, one particularly confusing gladiator poetry reading. But you're already here. Your body is mid-process. It's too late for dignity. So you step forward, carefully, slowly. You find the driest section of bench, which is still wetter than it should be. You roll your tunic hem up and perch like a regretful heron. You stare at the sponge. It stares back. Someone tries to scoop it with a ladle. The ladle breaks. Someone else suggests a new sponge. They are shushed. Eventually, a boy, possibly the same one who delivered the emperor's pink sponge, enters with a net on a stick. He wears the expression of someone who lost a bet with the gods. He retrieves the sponge. He doesn't speak. No one claps. The sponge is placed into a new bucket. Fresh vinegar is poured. A sprig of rosemary is added, perhaps out of pity. You wipe. You don't look. You wash your hands with a handful of sand and the silent promise to never speak of this day again. Later, over dinner, someone asks if you saw the flood. You say, "Which flood?" And they nod. Because some things don't need to be remembered. Some things soggy, floating. Unspeakable things are better left drifting in history. There comes a day when even the most loyal sponge must fall. Not heroically. Not in battle. But quietly worn down by time, vinegar, and too many encounters with strangers who had no business eating that much lentil stew. And when that day comes, It's not marked by ceremony, but by a certain softness. Not a luxurious softness, a defeated one. The kind that suggests the sponge is no longer cleaning so much as vaguely reminding. You arrive at the latrina early. Not because you're especially eager, but because the mornings are the only time it's quiet. The air is sharp. The bench is cold. The sponge is limp. It slouches in the bucket like a piece of wet bread that once had dreams. You lift it. It droops. No spring, no give, just resignation. Others have noticed too. There are whispers. It's time. She's had a good run. Remember when it used to smell like actual vinegar? There's a hint of affection in the voices, which is disturbing, but not inaccurate. The sponge has served. For weeks, maybe months. No one remembers exactly when it first arrived. It was just there, one day firm, fragrant, full of misguided optimism. Now it's none of those things. A decision is made, quietly, as most sponge decisions are. The boy with the vinegar duty places the sponge onto a tray. Not a fine tray. A wooden one with a crack running down the middle. Appropriate. He carries it out slowly, like a retiring athlete or a disgraced politician. People nod as he passes. One man stands. He salutes. You feel something. Not sadness, exactly, but a sense of inevitability. You remember when you first used this sponge. You were unsure, untrusting. It smelled of citrus and challenge. It betrayed you slightly, but you grew used to it. You adapted. And now, as it disappears down the corridor, you realize that routine has a strange way of becoming affection. There is no replacement yet. This sparks tension. Someone suggests reusing the Emperor's discarded sponge. They are booed. Someone else offers a strip of cloth. A third man produces 3 pebbles from his pouch, hopeful. Everyone groans. Then the boy returns. Empty tray. He shrugs. It's gone. That's it. The sponge has been disposed of. Probably burned, or buried, or thrown into the Tiber with a rock tied around it and a whisper of thanks. No one knows. No one asks. You sit without wiping. Not because you enjoy discomfort, but because somehow wiping with anything else feels disloyal. The sponge, in all its flawed, foul, communal absurdity, had earned your respect. Eventually, a new sponge arrives. It is smaller, firmer, unblemished, suspiciously optimistic. You do not use it right away. Instead, you stand. You nod to the bucket, empty once again, but waiting. You leave the latrina with the quiet understanding that something has ended. That part of your day, that small, strange moment of shared surrender has changed. And in Rome, even the sponge does not live forever. You are summoned early, not for a council meeting, not to greet a foreign dignitary. No, this summons is more private. A gentle knock, a whispered reminder. And so you rise, robes slipping around your shoulders like a reluctant cloud, and make your way down the gilded corridor to the royal privy. The room itself is ornate. Too ornate. Painted ceilings, carved door frames, incense burning in brass bowls shaped like swans mid-wail. The seat itself is made of polished cedar, with floral inlays and armrests, as though you might need to strike a diplomatic pose mid-process. It's called a relief chamber, though there is very little relief to be found. The wood creaks with expensive disapproval as you settle down. You are not alone. Behind a heavy silk curtain stands the attendant. He does not speak. He does not breathe loudly. But you know he's there, the soft rustle of fabric, the faint clink of a perfumed vial being uncorked. His job is to manage the pot, stir the incense, ensure no insects arrive uninvited, and pretend he's never seen you like this. It's an arrangement built on silence and shame. The pot beneath you is ceramic, hand-painted, and slightly too warm. Someone placed coals beneath it earlier. For comfort, they say. But the heat creeps upward like ambition, and suddenly the throne feels less regal and more interrogative. You shift. The cedar shifts back. And then comes the scent. Not yours. That is expected. No, this is the scent they add afterward, during, sometimes even before. Lavender, crushed mint, powdered amber scents, meant to confuse the air into forgetting what it knows. But it doesn't work. Not really. Now the air just smells like someone tried to perfume a problem instead of solve it. You reach for the cloth. It's folded precisely. Embroidered with the royal emblem. Scented. Fluffy. A servant washed it by hand this morning while muttering prayers to the household gods of softness and discretion. You use it. You feel regal. Then you feel deeply mortal. You ring the bell. A quiet scraping sound behind the curtain. The attendant collects the pot with careful hands. He bows a movement so slight it might have been the wind and vanishes with your dignity in a lidded jar. You are alone again. The seat remains warm. You remain unsure. You rise. You adjust your robe. You walk back through the corridor, past marble busts of ancestors who probably did the same thing in similar rooms and are now sculpted to look like they never did anything of the sort. You pass a servant. He bows. You nod. You wonder if he knows. He knows. Everyone in the palace knows. You had your moment on the other throne. And tomorrow you will return. Because nobility may wear silk, command armies, and dine on gilded fish, but when it comes to bodily needs, even the highest born must sit, shift, and hope the incense does its job. You see them everywhere and nowhere. The ones in grey linen. Always grey. Not the crisp grey of formal robes or the luxurious grey of dyed wool, but a grey that whispers, "I have been splashed more times than I can count." They appear in corridors, always moving in the same direction, away from things. Away from rooms where candles are still burning and people are pretending that nothing human ever happens behind embroidered curtains. They are the bucket bearers, not by title. No one calls them that. No one calls them anything, really. They are not greeted in the halls, not mentioned in official roles, not featured in murals. They are ghosts with tasks. And their task, their singular, unwavering, daily humiliation is to carry away the royal waste without ever revealing, even by facial twitch, that they know what it is. You pass one this morning. He nods, just once. The bucket he carries is covered in silk, but silk can only hide so much. You smell the truth beneath it, not pungent, not horrible, just undeniable. A quiet offence wrapped in perfume and shame. He walks past a noblewoman who deliberately turns to examine a tapestry. Another servant sweeps behind him, not because the floor is dirty, but because it's part of the choreography. Cleanliness and pretense, step by step. You try to remember their names. You can't. Maybe you never knew them. Maybe no one ever did. It's easier that way. You can't gossip about someone if you can't remember who they are. You can't point at them during a feast and whisper, "That's the one who tripped carrying the Empress's third bucket during midsummer." No, you say nothing. Everyone says nothing. And yet, they know everything. They know whose pot is loudest, whose incense is strongest, who leaves things behind that are best left undescribed. They could write books, histories, novels full of scents and noises and the subtle dramas of digestion. But they don't. They walk, they carry, they clean. And then they vanish. You follow one, once. Not intentionally. Just curious. He disappears down a side hall, then through a door you've never noticed. A stairwell, a turn, a low stone room. Inside, rows of pots, not decorative, not displayed, just lined up in quiet, awful solidarity. Some are soaking, some are steaming. The air is thick with vinegar and hard-earned silence. You step back, you leave. You never mention it. Later that night, you pass the same servant again. He's carrying nothing this time, just walking, hands folded, eyes downcast. You nod. He does not respond. He doesn't need to. The understanding has already passed between you something heavier than the bucket he carried this morning. You go to bed knowing that your life depends on people you've never spoken to. People who see the worst of you, day after day, and still show up. Still carry the shame. Still leave no trace. They ask for no thanks, and you give them exactly that. There are many positions in the palace hierarchy: chamberlain, cupbearer, advisor to the inner court, keeper of the outer court, master of tapestries, and more. Some carry swords. Some carry scrolls. A few carry trays of fruit that never get eaten. But then there is the one who carries no object, only responsibility. the pot inspector. You didn't know this role existed until the day you heard a servant whisper the title with the same tone, usually reserved for curses or divine punishments. "He's the pot inspector," they said. "You know, the one who checks." And now, as fate or misfortune would have it, you meet him. He is not what you expect. You think perhaps he'd be sour, hunched, reeking of boiled vinegar and career disappointment. But he is straight-backed, well-groomed, and dressed in layers of cream and gold, as though someone tried to dress regret in nobility. He does not avert his eyes. He looks you full in the face, and you feel, briefly, as though he has already catalogued your digestive history by posture alone. His job is simple, they say. But it isn't. Every day he walks the palace with a small notebook and a longer memory. He inspects the contents of each pot after it has been removed, cooled and properly covered with a decorative lid. He does not lift the lid himself, a servant does that. He simply nods, peers in, and then, and this is the most disturbing part, he sometimes writes something down. No one knows what's in the notebook. Is it medical observations? Political commentary? Poetry? Conspiracy? Does he write? The Duke may have worms, or the Empress's dinner disagreed with her violently, or does he simply tally the number of pots that required scrubbing? You want to ask, but you don't, because he carries with him a certain power, not formal, not spoken, but the quiet authority of someone who knows too much. He's never in meetings, never at celebrations, but everyone seems to know where he is at all times. One afternoon you walk behind him. He pauses outside the Empress's chamber. A servant emerges, pale and carrying a covered pot with two hands and a look of haunted urgency. The inspector steps forward, looks into the pot, says nothing, then turns the tiniest corner of his mouth downward, not a grimace, not quite just a muscle's whisper of disappointment. He writes. The servant bows and vanishes. You do not sleep well that night. You wonder what would happen if the notebook were ever found. Would it read like a chronicle of decline? A map of the empire's innards? Or simply a list of things too indelicate for marble inscriptions? The next morning, the pot inspector passes you in the hallway. He nods. You nod. You walk faster, because there are secrets and there are secrets. And then there is whatever he saw in the pot behind curtain number 4. There are few greater betrayals than waking in the middle of the night and realizing the chamber pot is not where it should be. It should be at your bedside, tucked beneath a low table, its lid ajar like a silent invitation. But it isn't. Maybe a servant forgot. Maybe someone moved it. Maybe the universe is testing you. Either way, the result is the same: urgency, panic, and the sudden realization that your royal robes were not designed for speed. You fumble in the dark. The room is vast, too vast, and filled with objects that exist purely to stub toes. A harp. A lacquered stool shaped like a lion. A decorative brazier that hasn't been lit since last winter. Your foot finds all of them. You try not to curse. You curse anyway. Softly, like a noble with shame. You consider calling for a servant, but it's late. You'd have to pull the bell rope, wait, explain yourself. Worse, you might wake the pot inspector, and your incident would become a notation. So you do what many do. Though none admit it, you go in search of a pot yourself. The hallway is cold. The floor tiles bite your feet like small, disciplined wolves. The torchlight flickers just enough to make every statue look judgmental. You pass a bust of your great-uncle and wonder if he ever had to do this. You know the answer. He didn't. Halfway down the corridor, you remember a service room, a small alcove where extra pots are stored for guests too discreet to ask. You shuffle faster. The urgency has gone from polite to serious. You whisper encouragement to yourself. You make deals with the gods. You regret every grape you ate at supper. You reach the door. It's locked. Of course it is. Of course it is. You lean your head against the wood and sigh. The pot, no doubt, is just on the other side. Sitting there, clean, waiting. You're here, not clean, not waiting. You turn, and that's when you see it. At the end of the corridor, just past the statue of the winged goat pot. Not elegant, not royal, but real, left, perhaps, by a distracted servant or a very fast-moving noble. It's crooked, Its lid is missing. It is perfect. You move like you haven't moved in years. Not running, exactly, but something like purposeful gliding. You reach it. You verify. You use it. The relief is immediate and total. You whisper a prayer of gratitude. You promise to donate to temple renovations. You lie, but it feels noble. Then you hear footsteps. You freeze. A servant appears, sees you crouched behind the goat statue, holding your robe with one hand and dignity with the other. He says nothing. You say nothing. He bows. Not out of respect, but out of understanding. You shuffle back to your room, pretending nothing happened. And in the morning, you say to yourself, next time, I'll check the pot before bed. You won't. No one ever does. You always assumed that the palace smelled like luxury. Frankincense, rosewater, a hint of cinnamon from the kitchens, maybe the soft floral tray left by nobles whose entire job seemed to be drifting between balconies with scented scarves. That's what visitors think. That's what you used to think. But now, after enough time near the Privies, you know the truth. The palace smells like denial. Not absence. Not cleanliness. Just well-disguised reality. It begins innocently. The pot rooms are perfumed. Fine. Understandable. A bit of dried lavender. A dab of clove oil. But nobles are competitive. You scent your pot with mint. Someone else tries basil. You line your seat with crushed violet. They retaliate with ambergris. It escalates quickly. What begins as hygiene becomes olfactory warfare. One day you step into a side corridor and are hit-not-greeted by a wave of conflicting smells. Bergamot crashes into myrrh. Camphor wrestles with coriander. Someone clearly used lemon peel far too liberally, and now the walls smell like a pastry that has seen things. You gag, quietly, nobly. You press a perfumed cloth to your face, which helps for exactly 3 seconds, until you realize it's soaked in yet another scent, one that seems to combine honey, goat musk, and confidence. It doesn't help. You investigate. In the Empress's wing, the pots are surrounded by hanging sachets, silk bundles stuffed with herbs, tied with gold thread, suspended from brass hooks like scented bats. The air is thick. You imagine it could be sliced with a butter knife and spread on bread. One servant faints weakly from the fumes. Another developed an allergy so severe he now twitches at the sight of cinnamon. You peek into the pot. It has petals in it. Actual flower petals. You wonder who thought this helped. Meanwhile, across the palace, the old general has declared war on subtlety. His chamber pot room smells like pine tar and burned sage, with a top note of something that might be dried fish or possibly revenge. He claims it clears the sinuses. It certainly clears the corridor. Others follow suit. One nobleman insists on anise oil. Another demands crushed fennel. The resulting blend in the eastern wing makes your eyes water and causes birds to avoid the windows. You watch a pigeon flap away mid-landing, visibly disturbed. Eventually, someone tries to regulate it. A royal decree, 3 cents per room, maximum. No overlapping citrus. Incense must not exceed 2 sticks per hour. Sackets to be spaced no less than 1 cubit apart. No one follows it. You retreat to your own privy. You use plain vinegar. Just vinegar. Nothing more. It stings slightly but doesn't argue with your nose. You sit. You breathe. You feel almost peaceful. Until someone walks by wearing a blend of musk, mint, and something unidentifiable but emotionally aggressive. You sigh. Because in the palace, even smells have ambitions. You think, at first, that it's just a pot, a ceramic container, a practical object, a necessity, perhaps even an inconvenience, but surely not a matter of influence or hierarchy. You think this because you are naive, because you haven't yet seen the seating chart for the annual Feast of Autumn and how the privy assignments are adjusted accordingly. In the palace, everything is symbolic: the direction of a bow, the depth of a curtsy, the type of fruit on a plate. And yes, even the location of your chamber pot. There is a ranking. High nobles have their own private relief chambers, with cedar seats and attendants who only speak in whispers. Their pots are cleaned first, emptied into golden-handled buckets. washed in perfumed water and dried in the sun, as if even the air must be filtered before touching the residue of the elite. These pots never crack, never stain. If one does, it is replaced so quickly the noble in question never notices, or is allowed to notice. Mid-level nobles, however, share. They're grouped by wing, by family, by seniority, sometimes by accident. One year, 2 rival cousins were placed in the same privy rotation. The result was a week-long silent war, conducted entirely through notes pinned to the privy door. Notes that included drawings, poor ones, but pointed. And then there are the guests. The guests. Foreign dignitaries receive special treatment, of course, but only if their kingdoms are currently useful. If not, their pots are made of plain clay and placed in echoey side halls, where every movement is acoustically magnified. You can always tell how diplomatic relations are going by the number of curtains hung around a visiting ambassador's chamber pot. You learn this the hard way. One evening you request a change of quarters closer to the gardens, you say, for air, for calm. You are granted the room. What you are not told is that this room's pot has a certain reputation. It is unpolished, slightly off-centre, and handled only by the trainee bucket bearers. The shame is immediate. You ring for a cloth, and the servant arrives without making eye contact. The next morning, you overhear someone whisper, he's been demoted. He's got the northeast pot now. You try to reclaim your old room. It's occupied by someone with better timing. So you do the only thing left, you decorate your pot. You place a small bouquet beside it, a ribbon. You start rumours that it was the emperor's preferred chamber before he ascended. A few people believe you. One even compliments the aroma. But the damage is done. You now understand that the pot is not just a pot. It is a statement, a symbol, a throne beneath the throne. You know your place, and now, unfortunately, so does everyone else. And the next time you hear someone request a modest room with good ventilation, you'll know what they really mean. They mean anywhere but northeast. It begins, as all disasters do, with a small mistake and a larger assumption. A servant's sprained ankle. A replacement who was not briefed. A schedule that was written in a hurry and misread in an even greater hurry. The result. A shift missed. A routine broken. A bucket or 3 left too long. And the next morning, the palace begins to smell wrong. Not immediately. The scent creeps in slowly, like a lazy predator or a guilty child. Just a hint at first, tucked behind the usual lavender and sandalwood. A background note. You think maybe someone overdid the vinegar. You think maybe the new incense isn't blending properly. You think, and this is where you truly err, it will go away. It does not. By mid-morning, people begin to comment. Quietly, at first. Nobles are not known for their directness. They say things like, is there a new scent in the corridor? Or the air seems particularly earthy today. Servants nod and vanish quickly, eyes wide, backs stiff, trying not to inhale too deeply. Then the first door is opened. A pot room, shared by 5 lesser dukes and 1 cousin of the queen who insists on sitting backwards for spiritual alignment. The smell escapes like a prisoner finally tunneling free. It wraps around ankles, climbs up noses, and settles in as if it has paid rent. No amount of sachets can compete. The cedar seat does not help. The embroidered curtain flutters, as if trying to escape. You arrive shortly after the chaos begins. People are gathered in the hall, speaking in low, panicked tones. The door is shut again, but the damage is done. You offer the question everyone else is thinking, were the buckets not emptied? Someone nods. Someone else retches into a silk handkerchief. An emergency is declared. The head of household sanitation, an older woman, who always smells faintly of vinegar and victory, is summoned. She surveys the scene, squints, and mutters, "We haven't had a lapse since the bean incident of '63. No one asks what that was." She barks orders. Bucket bearers mobilize. A rolling cart squeaks ominously down the corridor. Every pot is checked, every bucket lifted with care and slight horror. Someone throws open a window. Someone else closes it again after realizing the wind is not in their favor. But it's too late for secrecy. Rumours spread faster than odour. By noon, the royal kitchens have received 5 requests for deodorizing stews. A senator proposes a law about bucket inspections. The empress remains locked in her chamber with 3 incense sticks and a personal fan. You light your own candle and wonder whether humanity truly deserves architecture. Eventually, the buckets are emptied. The pots are scrubbed. Vinegar flows like wine. The air clears, mostly. But something lingers, not just the scent, but the memory. A shared understanding that, no matter how gilded the palace, it still relies on humble systems, on schedules, on humans, and sometimes on people remembering that buckets, if left too long, become reminders of the world beneath all the perfume. And that world is very real. There are many dangers in palace life: political intrigue, poisoned wine, the occasional collapsing tapestry, but none prepare you for the moment when a small, overly pampered dog wrapped in velvet and delusion climbs into your chamber pot and refuses to leave. It starts, as such things often do, with silence. Not the comforting silence of a well-ordered household, but the suspicious, unnatural hush that usually means something has gone terribly, absurdly wrong. You rise in the late morning, stretch, yawn, and drift toward the privy chamber in your slippers, the soft ones with gold trim that make you feel slightly more important than you are. The pot, as always, is lidded and discreetly tucked behind a privacy screen. You lift the lid, and you stare into the eyes of Princess Pompilia. The royal lapdog, a creature the size of a roast chicken and twice as spoiled, blinks at you from the bottom of the pot, curled tightly as though it's a velvet cushion lined with dreams. Her ears twitch. Her tail gives a single warning wag. You lower the lid. You consider screaming. You do not scream. Instead, you stand motionless for a moment, caught between horror and etiquette. There is no guidebook for this. No scroll labelled etiquette in case of pet in pot. You ring the bell. Once, twice, an attendant arrives. He sees your face and stops in his tracks. There's a situation, you say. He peeks. He recoils. Then comes the real problem. Princess Pompilia does not want to leave. Attempts to extract her result in whines, growls, and a brief incident in which a silver ladle is weaponized. A second servant is summoned. Then a third. Soon, there is a council 4 people in varying states of panic, crouched around a chamber pot containing a dog who, by birth and temperament, believes she is above all of them. Eventually, someone mentions the Duchess's perfumed beef snacks. They are fetched. A trail is laid. Princess Pompilia considers it, sniffs, sneezes. Then, with a sigh that suggests deep disappointment in everyone involved, she exits the pot with slow, imperial disdain and prances down the hallway as though nothing happened. You're left with the aftermath. The pot is declared compromised. A new one is ordered. The room is aired out. The curtain is burned. You sit on the edge of your cedar seat and wonder if this is what leadership feels like: managing absurdity, maintaining calm, pretending that a dog didn't just dethrone your dignity. Later that day, you overhear a servant say, "He handled it well. Didn't even faint." It's meant as praise. You take it. And that evening, when Princess Pompilia trots past your door again, you shut it firmly, cover your pot with a plate, and place a stool on top for good measure. She pauses, sniffs, moves on. You exhale, because in the palace you fear not kings, nor assassins, nor even the pot inspector. You fear the tiny dog who sleeps in your toilet. The day begins with feasting, which should already be a warning sign. No one should eat that much honeyed goose before noon. But this is the palace, and the emperor has declared it a day of culinary abundance, which roughly translates to multiple courses, no restraint, and at least one flaming dessert shaped like a lion. You are required to attend both banquets, one for the diplomats, one for the inner circle, and your digestive system, tragically loyal, agrees to go along. By late afternoon, you begin to feel the consequences. The first course at the second feast is a stew of questionable texture and alarming temperature. The wine flows faster than wisdom. Someone toasts something. You laugh. You regret laughing. You excuse yourself. No one notices. The corridor tilts ever so slightly. You reach your privy chamber. The pot is there, as always. Polished. Warmed by a small brazier tucked beneath the cedar platform. You sit. You brace. The chamber fills with the soft sound of someone questioning their life choices. You reach for the cloth. You breathe through your nose. You count ceiling tiles for comfort. Then you realize the pot is full. Not just used. Full. As in, another drop would crown it. A still pond of humiliation, trembling at the edge. You freeze. You calculate. Could you stand and ring the bell without shifting your weight? Could you slide slightly to the left without triggering disaster? You try. You fail. The pot overflows. It happens with no drama, no sound, just a slow, deliberate rise like a tide made of consequence. The cloth slips from your hand. The scent changes. The floor becomes involved. You say nothing, but your face says everything. A servant arrives. She knocks gently, then peeks in. Her expression remains carefully neutral, the kind of neutrality that has seen worse. Probably. Hopefully. I believe the bucket was not replaced, she says softly, as though discussing rainfall or an unfortunate melon. She brings towels. A second pot. A pail of water. The word emergency is not used, but it hovers in the room like a discreet ghost. You are ushered out. You are handed a robe. You are advised to take a short walk while the chamber is addressed. You do. You walk past the Statue of Victory and feel like an ironic footnote. You pass a maid carrying a tray of figs and briefly consider warning her, but decide against it. Let fate do what it will. Later, everything is spotless. A new pot gleams under fresh light. The curtain has been replaced. The floor smells faintly of lemon and silent judgment. You thank the servant. She nods, not kindly, but with professional resignation. That night, in bed, you replay the moment the pot reached its limit. Not with shame, with awe. The structural integrity, the timing, the elegance of its failure. And you vow from this day forward to never trust stew that jiggles. Progress, they say, is inevitable, especially when a minor prince returns from Alexandria bearing stories of plumbing, drainage, and a marvel called the siphon. He has diagrams. He has ambition. He has no idea what he's doing, but he convinces the palace council to allow a modern improvement to the privy system. A self-emptying pot, he says with pride. A chamber that cleans itself with water from above. You suspect disaster. You are not wrong. Construction begins. Tilers arrive. Masons arrive. A man claiming to be a hydraulic visionary arrives wearing a hat shaped like a duck and speaks exclusively in metaphors about rivers. The cedar seat is removed. So is the incense rack. What remains is a pit, a pipe, a large ceramic tank perched ominously above the chamber, like a bird with digestive anxiety. No one explains how it works. Everyone says it will be wonderful. They choose your chamber to test it. Of course they do. You are told the seat is now flushable. You are also told, with less clarity, to pull a rope when finished and to step away briskly. That phrase alone should have been the warning. But you sit. You proceed with caution. The new seat is cold, slick, and somehow judgmental. The room echoes more than before. You wipe, you rise. You pull the rope. Nothing happens. You wait. Then it begins. A sound. A gurgle. A hiss. Then a roar. Then an explosion of water from the ceramic tank above, blasting down like Neptune had a tantrum. It hits the pot, the seat, the floor, your robe. The walls tremble. A candlestick falls. You step back briskly, but not briskly enough. The water continues. It slushes. It sprays. It reflects off the polished tiles and returns. You are soaked. You scream. It's a dignified scream, but a scream nonetheless. Servants arrive. The hydraulic visionary arrives. He shouts glory as water leaks into the corridor. You are offered a towel and a footstool to sit on while they inspect the wreckage. You decline both. The system is declared unpredictable. The official report uses the word ambitious 9 times. The pot is removed. The chamber is dried with cloths that smell faintly of surrender. Your robe is hung outside to drip for 3 days. The prince offers a written apology on perfumed parchment. You throw it in the brazier without comment. Eventually a new pot is installed. Unflushable, unambitious, unproblematic. You sit on it that evening with deep gratitude. No pipes, no surprises, just the familiar shape of routine. Later, over dinner, the prince tells a story about the Roman aqueducts and how this is only the beginning. You excuse yourself. You do not return. Because you know now, some things are meant to stay simple. Some rituals do not need innovation. And when it comes to palace privies, it's not flushing you fear. It's the people who believe they can improve it. And so, here we are, after scented pots, royal mishaps, floating sponges, and the slow, regal disaster of a self-flushing toilet. You've travelled through stone privies, velvet curtain disasters, and the faint aroma of political failure. You've learned, perhaps more than you meant to, about the stubbornness of waste, the comedy of status, and the quiet dignity of the servants who carry the buckets and never speak a word. Now the palace grows dim again. The corridors quiet. The steam from the vinegar pots has faded, the incense has burned low, and somewhere, not far from a cedar bench and a brazier that refuses to stay lit, a pot sits, waiting. But not for you. Not tonight. Tonight your robe is dry. Your feet are warm. You've pulled the curtain across your own bed, tucked the cloth beside your pillow, not perfumed, not embroidered, just comfortable. Thank you for staying with me, right to the end of this strange and slightly squishy journey. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk about silk sheets or noble insomnia or the quiet politics of breakfast bread. But for now, the sponge is clean, the chamber is quiet, and the night can finally mercifully begin. And tonight, you are the one who must carry the bucket once more.